Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industries Conference on Unemployment Compensation. We're calling it 2.0, relating to the COVID-19 issues. My name is Ron Sedlacek, and I'm Vice President and General Counsel with the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry. This is our second conference on the issue, the first being held on March 24th, 2020. For some of you, that might seem a lifetime. For others, a blur. But this is our second conference on the issue. And since the first conference, there's been just a number of questions that we've been fielding. There are some compliance concerns and affecting employers and employees alike. And so we thought it was about time that we revisit this issue and provide some updates for you all. So again, today we're pleased to have with us Labor Commissioner John Albin and General Counsel Katie Thurber from the Department of Labor. And they're going to lead us through these updates and other compliance issues. Before we start, I'd like to just mention a couple of ground rules. This is a recorded session and will be accessible for those who cannot attend at this time. And just for those that cannot, this was recorded on April 15th, tax day, 2020. And so now, just everyone is muted and will remain that way during the phone call. And there is an opportunity to ask questions. Kristen Hasselbrook from our office is standing by to take those questions by email as they come up. So I'm going to give you her email address. It's KHASSEBROOK@necchamber.com. Again, that's KHASSEBROOK@nechamber.com. So, as I say, some of the topics that we're going to cover today could change in the future, and we will update you as those changes occur. We're going to further explore some recent changes and to the current program and the new programs that are applicable to the Nebraska Employment Insurance Program and some other related issues. Our panel today will begin with a brief overview of recent state and federal changes, kind of a 30,000-foot level, just to reacquaint you with the overlay of the issue we're going to be discussing, and then covering specific topics such as updated guidances and compliance issues, the effect on self-employed, independent contractors, or gig workers, COVID and non-COVID related claims, return to work offers and refusals to return to work. We're going to have a little bit more concentration on the Nebraska Short-Time Compensation Program. The do's and don'ts, things that work and things that don't, and some ongoing compliance issues as you implement such a program. We're going to cover briefly the interplay between some state and local or state and federal programs, and then go over some timelines and future issues for you to consider. And then, of course, we'll have time for your questions and hopefully answers to those questions. So let's get started. We're going to begin today with John Albin. And let me introduce John to you. John is the Nebraska Commissioner of Labor. He was appointed by Governor Ricketts in January 2015. And before becoming the commissioner, John did serve as acting Commissioner of Labor and General Counsel to the department. We also have Katie Thurber, and Katie is General Counsel to the Department of Labor and serves as the interim unemployment insurance director as well. She also serves as the department's legislative liaison, offers assistance and oversees the programs dealing with the Unemployment Insurance Tribunal, as well as various labor standard programs, including wage payment and collection and contractor registration and child labor laws. So we'll begin by turning the program over to John Albin.
Thank you, Ron. We're glad to be back here again. It seems like it was a lot longer ago than March 24th that we were last here, but I'm going to trust you on the dates on that. A lot has happened since then, and so we'll kind of go through it. But before we go into the newer things, just to back up a little bit, for those that weren't on the first conference, the Congress passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And a part of that act was to create federal funding, additional federal funding for the increased caseload that the states have. And among the things that the act did was to encourage states to relax some of its requirements for items such as work search and able and available, and that to, at least on a temporary basis, to adjust for the effects of the COVID virus outbreak. So back on March 17th, Governor Ricketts signed Executive Order 20-04, which according to its statement was effective through May 2nd. Now, it's subsequently been extended through August 1st, but the original date was May 2nd. Basically, it had 7 provisions in that relating to the unemployment program. The first one was, as you probably all know, back in the day, anybody on a leave of absence was absolutely ineligible for unemployment benefits, and that still continues if somebody just doesn't want to be there. But in those cases where someone needs to take off time to care for their children because they've been quarantined, that sort of thing, where the employer said, yeah, it's fine, take what time you need, be back by such and so date. We didn't want those people, because of the COVID-19 outbreak, we didn't want those people to be disqualified from benefits during that time period. So we relaxed that requirement on the leave of absence. As you all know, Nebraska has the waiting week requirement under normal circumstances where an individual has to be fully eligible for benefits for at least 1 week before they can actually receive a paid week. And in Nebraska, we have suspended that provision through now August 31st. So the first waiting week is paid, and Katie will talk a little bit about it when she talks about the CARES Act, but the good news is the federal government is now paying for that first week of eligibility. So it is not on the Nebraska employers. They encouraged us in the Coronavirus Response Act to be a little more lenient on the able and available provisions, because if you're home in quarantine, you're wanting to go back to work, you need to go back to work, but they're telling you got to stay home, and technically you could have found that as a person as not being available for work or able to accept a job, and so we've relaxed that requirement. Basically now it's relaxed back to, okay, have you taken yourself out of the labor market? If you said, no, I'm staying home to watch the Oprah Winfrey Network, you're out. But if you're staying home because you're 2-week quarantine because somebody in your household's been infected, then you're still eligible because you haven't removed yourself from the job market on a permanent basis. The fourth paragraph temporarily waived the work search requirements. Nebraska traditionally has had one of the strongest work search requirements, or at least in the last few years has had the strongest work search requirement. Right now with the social distancing, we're not wanting people to go out into the communities and spend a lot of time going door to door. And the reality of it is, with the number of shutdowns due to the COVID-19 outbreak, a lot of employers don't have jobs available anyway. So we've temporarily suspended that work search requirement. The fifth paragraph has probably prompted the most questions, and that's that we granted non-charging to employers if the separation is COVID-19 related. And looking at the language, I can see how you can read it more narrowly than we do, but the department's interpretation of that provision is that if the shutdown is, or the person's out of work is COVID-19 related, that meets the test. You don't have to actually be ill. You don't have to be actually quarantined. But if you're working at a business where half your workforce has been quarantined, so they shut down for a while, you may not be ill. You may not even be technically required to be quarantined, but your unemployment is due to COVID-19 outbreak. And so we are non-charging those benefits. And just for the moment, at least, there's kind of a presumption that most shutdowns are COVID-19 related, because especially if you're working with the bars and restaurants, the hairdressing salons, and the hotel accommodations industry, you know, they may not have quarantined all the people at the Graduate Hotel when they announced they were shutting down, but it was definitely COVID-19 related, and those sorts of benefits drawn by those workers would be eligible for non-charging. Another thing we did in that provision was to non-charge the reimbursable employers as well. As you know, traditionally reimbursable employers, governmental entities, the nonprofits, the small, they're all eligible for, they get to choose. They can be contributory like a for-profit employer and make the quarterly return, or they can only reimburse the department exactly what the department has paid out. And so to try and help them along, at least on a temporary basis, we've been non-charging those reimbursable employers. Katie will talk about a little bit, one of the acts is we're hoping to get some reimbursement for that to help shore up the trust fund, because there was a provision in the federal acts regarding that. Another provision in paragraph 6 of Executive Order 2004 is we provided for non-charging of all short-time compensation benefits. Katie's the expert on short-time compensation, and she'll talk to you more about that later. But under some of the federal legislation, we can get reimbursed dollar for every dollar of benefits that we pay in the for short-time compensation. So we haven't figured out the billing process yet, but we're working on it, and we'll get that going as soon as possible. And then in the 7th paragraph of the executive order, as you know, you lose your appeal rights if you don't respond to a request for separation information within 10 days, and then you're automatically charged. And we've just said, okay, we're not going to do that for this time period, because we realize a lot of employers are pretty small bookkeeping offices or HR offices. And, you know, if you're one person that handles all that is out for whatever reason, because of the COVID-19 outbreak, we didn't want you to be penalized for that. So we're taking a relaxed look at that. Quite honestly, we'll probably be taking a pretty relaxed look in terms of those payments that are coming up on the due on April 30th or sooner for this quarter's taxes. If there's a good reason for not getting them in on time, we're not going to be penalizing you and assessing interest on that, because this is just a really unusual time. You know, all of our unemployment systems are set up to address economic issues that cause economic downturns. And this one is a health issue that's causing an economic disruption. And so the systems aren't designed for it. Ours wasn't designed for it. We're still writing program for it. And so we recognize that employers are similarly affected. Then, as I mentioned, there was a second executive order that was 20-14, which clarifies the non-charging provisions a little bit, that they apply to both regular and contributory employers. We made a modification in the short-time compensation program. By statute, you can modify your short-time compensation program, but you specifically cannot extend the life of the program by modification. And so in the executive order, we amend that, because a lot of employers went in with the thought process that, okay, this is 2 weeks and we're done, so we'll do a short-time compensation for 2 or 3 weeks and then we're going to be back. And they wrote their plan specific to that date. And we're saying it's silly to make employers come back and have to file a new plan when it's really the old plan. It just needs an extended date. So under the provisions of Executive Order 20-14, we will do that. And then again, the executive order extends all of the original Executive Order 20-4 to August 1st. And so then Katie was going to kind of address the CARES Act and the federal programs that created for you.
So the CARES Act is Public Law 116-136, and it's the federal law that's been getting quite a bit of attention. The first program that we've been getting the majority of questions about is the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, which is FPUC. And that is the additional $600 that is available starting the week of March 29th and ends the week of July 25th. Those dates are really important to remember because it's not effective until the Department of Labor entered into an agreement with the U.S. Department of Labor. We did that on March 27th or 8th, I believe. So it's effective the week following that. And then in the law, you hear July 31st as the end date. That is not a Saturday, and in the benefit world, everything ends on a Saturday. And so it goes to the week prior. So it does end July 25th, 2020.
Katie, if I could interject just a second. We probably don't have a lot of claimants on the call, but we've been getting a lot of calls from claimants asking us why it doesn't go back to the date of their original unemployment. A lot of them were laid off in early March. And that is because the federal law did not allow it to go back beyond March 29th. That was the first, under the federal law, we couldn't pay benefits until the first week that started after we signed the agreement. So we literally had Katie and I in on Saturday morning getting all the paperwork signed so we could get it submitted yet that day so that it would be effective for the week of the 29th. So we availed ourselves of the maximum amount of benefits that we could get out to your workers as they're laid off or on short-time compensation during this period.
And to be eligible for the additional $600, people have to have $1 of eligibility each week. And that can be under almost any program. It can be under regular unemployment, short-time compensation, the pandemic unemployment, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and the pandemic emergency unemployment, which I will also get to in a little bit. So essentially, it's very broad. If there is $1 of eligibility in a week during that time frame, you get the additional $600. It is tax deductible. And so if your employees are saying they didn't get a full $600, that is most likely why. We can also offset child support. And if there is an outstanding overpayment, we can offset up to 50% of that. But generally speaking, the $600 will go to almost everyone with eligibility. And we have actually, started paying that. So we have paid anyone who's been paid for the week ending April 11th should have received the additional money if eligible. And we are working to backdate to the prior week. That should happen yet this week as well. And going forward, that should be applied. The next program that we get the majority of questions about is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, PUA. And what this is this is the program that opens eligibility up for almost everyone impacted by COVID-19. So this picks up the churches, the gig workers, the independent contractors, anyone who is not eligible for regular unemployment and is unemployed as a result of COVID-19 is eligible for PUA. Now the feds did some pretty broad language as far as what is related to COVID-19. And so it's just a second, 9 different things, I believe, if I have it, but it's caring for your children. It's if there's school is dismissed, so you now have to be home. If you're quarantined, if someone you live with is quarantined, if your work is shut down because of COVID, it's a pretty broad list. So it should pick up almost everyone right now. And that program, again, starts March 29th. It is also a program that required our agreement, and so it's only effective once we have the agreement with the states. But it goes back, doesn't that one go back to February?
Yeah, that
it does
one.
Go back to February. So it is retroactive, and so we will have to go back in time to apply that, but it still has to be COVID related. So in most cases in Nebraska, that's not going to kick in until about March 8th. That seems to be when we really started seeing the impact in this state.
Yeah, I think the statute technically says January 27th is the look back date, but January 20, again, it's our weird UI world. We always go with week beginning. It's a week beginning on or after July, or January 7th, but I think that takes it up to like February 3rd or 2nd or something like that. So, okay, sorry, Katie.
No, I prefer the tag team approach. So, and again, if you are receiving PUA, you also do get the additional $600 as long as you're within the time frame for the $600.
And if you do happen to be one of the self-employed, just to show how confusing Congress can make things work, you may be eligible for PUA going back as far as February, but the FPUC doesn't start till March 29th regardless. So you would receive a different benefit before than you will after. And then with the expiration of the FPUC on July 25th, you know, if you unfortunately would be still receiving PUA after that, your amount will go back down unless the Congress amends the act.
And it's just because nothing's ever straightforward. The most difficult part with PUA is the condition of eligibility that you are not eligible for regular unemployment. And so that requires us to follow up and confirm on a periodic basis that people are still not eligible for regular unemployment. So one thing that's happening right now is there was just a quarter change. And at a quarter change, you have a potential for a new base period. And so there would be potentially new base period eligibility. And so we have to confirm with everyone that they are not eligible for regular unemployment because of the new base period. The other issues where that will come up is if you are currently at home because your kids are home from school and you have to be there to take care of them. When the school year ends, they're no longer home because of a pandemic reason. And so we have to follow up and confirm that you're still at home either because you do not have a job to go back to or because the daycare that you do during the summer is also impacted and not open due to COVID-19.
And we get a lot of questions about the process for applying for PUA. And one of the fun facts of the federal legislation is, as Katie said, you can't draw PUA unless you are ineligible for UI. And they require you to actually apply for and be denied unemployment, even though you've been self-employed for your entire working life, have never been covered under the unemployment system. You still have to go through the hoops of applying for the unemployment, regular unemployment before you can be, so you can be disqualified. Now, the good news is it'll be a little bit easier starting hopefully next Sunday because we think we're going to have the PUA software launch so we can take the whole thing in one application rather than having to come back to you. But for right now, since all benefits are tied to the week of application, if you're interested or know someone that's interested in applying for PUA, they should go ahead and apply immediately so that they can get locked into this week as the start date.
Oh, and I should have added that so far every program I've talked about is 100% federally funded. So it's not coming out of our trust fund. The next program is the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, PEUC. I lovingly call it puke. It is an extension of benefits. So if anyone was around during the last recession, we had what was then just called emergency unemployment compensation. This is a very similar concept. So if you are traditionally eligible for regular unemployment and you have exhausted your claim, whether it's been a time, so you've completed your benefit year fully, or monetary, you've received all the benefits you were eligible for under your claim, you get an extension right now of 13 weeks. It's important to note that you go to that immediately following regular unemployment. So you apply for regular unemployment, or if you applied for regular unemployment anytime, if your benefit year expired anytime after July 2019, sorry, you need to refile with us because you potentially have this eligibility. But what is critical is kind of the pattern. So you do regular unemployment. If you are uneligible there, then we look at PEUC, the emergency unemployment. Then if you are not eligible there is when you go to PUA. So we don't expect you to know which benefit you're getting. That is the one nice thing about having the regular unemployment eligibility piece linked to everything, because from there we'll have the information to do the flow for you. But the $600 does also apply to that. And that program expires December 27th, 2020. The next provision is the funding of the waiting week. And John touched on this when he was going over the executive order. We didn't know this was going to get funded at the time we went forward with the executive order, but it is a very nice blessing for our trust fund. So we are getting 1 week of benefits, 100% funded for anyone where we waived their wait week. And so that's anyone who had a wait week after March 22nd. We get that week reimbursed from USDOL. The next is the funding of Scc Payments, which we also didn't know they would do, but they are USDOL is fully funding with federal dollars, short-time compensation programs right now. So I think if anyone's heard me speak, I have highly recommended short-time compensation, and I'm not going to stop. It is a great way to avert layoffs, still get your people unemployment, but they also get the additional $600. And it's also a win for our trust fund because that's being paid for by the federal dollars right now. And that's through December 27th as well. Then the next piece, USDOL is going to fund 1/2 of our charges to reimbursable employers. So John touched on the difference between reimbursable and contributory. By all means, don't just try and switch now. It's not that simple. And we are non-charging both reimbursable and contributory employers from a state perspective through August 1st. But through December 27th, we will get reimbursed for 1/2 of the charges to reimbursable employers. We are a little uncertain of how that's going to play out. There's quite a few questions of whether or not you bill the employer and then we reimburse the employer. But we will get future guidance on that, hopefully yet this week. Did you have anything you wanted to add on any of those before we go into the UPLs? Unemployment insurance program letters.
No, let's just go ahead and get into the UPLs.
Go ahead.
All right, well, we've received our guidances for the FPUC program and the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. If anybody's keeping score, UIPL 1520 is the FPUC UIPL, and UIPL 16-20 is the PUA one. One common theme that was both in those, both of those guidances and a prior one that we had received is that USDOL has taken the position that anyone who quits a job for the purpose of making themselves eligible for the federal benefits, fraud, and it's a federal crime. It's probably a state crime as well, but so they've taken a real tough stance in regard to that. And I think the chamber distributed to you a poster that we put together using some of that language that, you know, people just can't quit to get these benefits. And I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you that some people will actually, a lot of people will probably be earning more on unemployment than they were before. The trip point is somewhere around $1,000 a week or something like that to make it more lucrative to be on unemployment. But the good news, and Assistant Secretary John Polish sent it out in an email to us today, is just because if you're completely severed from your prior employment and you don't have a job to go back to and you're offered work, you are expected to accept that work. And that if you don't, it's a refusal of suitable work, which under Nebraska causes you to be ineligible for state benefits, also would disqualify you from federal benefits. And we actually had an instance of it come back up. We've been in kind of a hiring mode in the last few weeks, as you might imagine. And we had somebody turn us down because they said, oh, I can make more than that on unemployment. There will be consequences because, you know, it's not the intent of this system. I know it's hard when you create a system that applies to 53 different jurisdictions to make one that works everywhere. Nebraska is one of those states where people are making a little bit more money on unemployment than they did before, and so I can understand the temptation, but the old rules still apply. The old rules would also still apply if your facility's been shut down for a period of time and you offer the job back to your people and say, all right, we're ready to go. And they said, no, I like watching Oprah. That doesn't cut it. We will ask them if they got an offer of work. We do that every week on your certification, but just in case they forget to mention that to us, if you contact us, we will then launch an investigation into that claim, because this program is to help people through a really rough time for everybody, and it is not to create some sort of long-term pension plan for people not to go back to work. So I would encourage you, if you do have those instances, and I'm sure you will, because we're all dealing with human beings. If you've got people that refuse to come back to work, I hope first you tell them, you do realize that we'll report it and then you'll lose everything. But we're treating that as a quit if you refuse to come back to work, and under Nebraska law, that's an indeterminate disqualification. You have to requalify through earnings from subsequent employment that you leave through no fault of your own. So it's a pretty severe penalty, and we're hoping the employer community will help us out in that regard in terms of keeping track of everyone. And then just to show you that the feds really haven't forgot that in all of the UPLs, they always remind us that they appropriated $26 million to do integrity investigations of the claims that are paid under the CARES Act. So we're going to be paying attention, because they will get audited at least to some extent in the future. So I don't know, is there anything more we had to add on the UPLs, Katie, or do you want to move into the STC?
I guess the one thing I would say on the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, PUA, I talked about how you just have to not be eligible for regular unemployment. But that also means if you had an existing disqualification from a discharge or any other disqualification from regular unemployment, that actually switches you to the PUA while that's running as well.
I would like to ask one question that generically that we've gotten some advanced questions on while you're on the PUA subject. So we're dealing with the federal, the PUA dealing with independent contractors. And, an example that might be more universal, it could apply for not only goods but also services as well. But let's assume you have a retailer that sells flooring, carpeting, tile, wood flooring, so forth. They have a number of independent contractors that actually do the installations. The retailer charges a fee to the customer. The independent contractor gets a percentage of that fee. Sales are down. Independent contractor, let's say, can document from the year before that they're at least 25, 30% behind the season. How does that, are they eligible for benefits? And how much? If so.
Potentially. So as long as you are reduced from work, you should definitely apply for unemployment. And then you will go down, in the scenario just presented, you would go down the pandemic unemployment insurance path. Where the issue comes up is you still need to report your weekly earnings for the week. And then there is a reduction, just like there is in regular unemployment, for your earnings. So if you go 2 weeks with no job, no pay, it would be your full weekly benefit amount, plus the additional $600 if it's between now and July. Sorry, I lost the date, but
25th.
Thank you. Between now and July 25th, 2020. If you are above your weekly benefit amount that week, you would not receive money that week, but it's just a week-by-week determination.
Yeah, so you could go back in the next week and reopen your claim, and assuming no carpet jobs came in the next week, you could go back in. And I don't know if we mentioned the amounts on the pandemic unemployment assistance. It's set up like the disaster unemployment assistance that we had last year for the flooding. So the minimum dollar amount that you're entitled to is $174, and the maximum is $440. And again, that's based on your income. So if you've got a carpet installer that you work with that's looking, I mean, we're going to need some proof of income at some point in time. But, you know, Schedule C's, K-1 from an LLC or a partnership, those sorts of things, those will suffice for that sort of information as to the income levels.
Did you have more questions?
No, I think that's a general question while you run that we've been getting kind of put it into context there. So continue to talk about short time, please.
All right, short time compensation. Okay, I guess I'll start with just a general overview again, just in case we have some new listeners. Generally, short time compensation is also known as shared work, but it's a program designed to avert layoffs. So rather than lay off 2 people, the whole unit shares the pain, and I'll say 10 people's hours are reduced. The reason that this benefits the employer is that instead of losing workforce, you maintain the numbers. So the nice thing about short-time compensation is in the regular unemployment world, we determine your weekly benefit amount based on your earnings. Then each week you work, you have to report your earnings. If you're only reduced, say 10%, you're not going to be eligible for unemployment that week. In short-time compensation world, we determine your regular weekly benefit amount the exact same way we do regular unemployment. But when it comes to the weekly certification, we don't actually care how much you earned that week. We care how much your hours were reduced. So if your hours are reduced 10%, your weekly benefit, you get a 10% of your weekly benefit amount. If your hours are reduced 60%, you get 60% of your weekly benefit amount. And again, to repeat from previous, you also get the additional $600 under short-time compensation if you have $1 of eligibility.
And is the 60% limit, is that a Nebraska creation or is that a federal creation?
That is a federal creation. So the reason I use 10 and 60 in my example is 10 is what you have to be reduced to be eligible for STC for a week, at least 10%, and you can't be reduced more than 60%, and that is a federal conformity requirement. If you are not reduced within that 10 to 60% frame during a week, you do not have to end your plan. You can keep your plan going. The employee would just have to file for regular unemployment that week. They don't have to reopen their claim or do anything special other than do a weekly certification during that week. Big picture items I'm missing on that?
No, I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about reduced hours as opposed to STC, but I think if I did it at this point, it'd be confusing. So I'll let Katie finish the STC first.
Okay, so in general, this program, we have seen, well, in general, unemployment has seen a pretty big increase, but STC was not very widely used in the state prior to this pandemic. And so it's been a pretty big increase. And so we are working through some of that. One of the main things we are working through is we don't think our system was the most user-friendly when it comes to the initial plan application. And so we are working on making enhancements to that. So bear with us as I'm hoping to have that out soon. But the number one thing to remember is this is an employer-driven program. Employers have to submit a plan to the Department of Labor. It has to be approved by us before employees are eligible to participate. An employee can't put themselves on STC. It has to be driven by the employer. The plan should be submitted, but in theory, before you reduce the hours, although we have been trying to be pretty lenient and work with the employers. We know this came on very suddenly. So if you have questions on that, you just need to contact us.
Ron has a question for you.
Generically, and this is based on trying to get a number of questions together that are common, that need to be addressed. On the short short-time compensation program, you have your various types of work, administrative, let's say, and maybe line work. Let's say you're a manufacturer, and you have to lay off some administrative staff. But by the same token, you want to keep all of your production workers. So can you do a layoff and short-time compensation at once?
Yes. Okay. So that's an excellent question. So just to make sure everyone heard, the main question is, can you do a layoff and short-time compensation at once? And the answer is yes. What you cannot do is treat members of a unit differently. So in the scenario that was just given, it was divided between administrative and then line workers. And it was, can you lay off some of the administration, but keep all the line workers? And yes, you can do that. So as you're developing a plan, an employer assigns units, however it works for their business model. And once in that unit, you need to treat all members the same. And when I say that, in an ideal world, it's the exact same hours offered, exact same hours reduced every single day. This is not an ideal world. We're giving you flexibility in that. But what you can't do is completely lay off 2 employees in that unit and keep the remaining 8. At that point, you'd need to just terminate your plan and we could work with you on a new plan. Outside of that unit, though, you can do whatever you want to the rest of your workforce. So if you want to streamline your administration. You don't even have to tell us about it until they file for unemployment, and then you'll deal with someone other than me.
Well, and I think it's important too. One, Katie's mentioned several times, units. Units have to be 3 or more. That's one of the few hard and fast rules. You have to have a unit of 3 or more. But in Ron's example of the administrative versus the line workers, you can have different STC plans for different units, as well as have lay off some and have an STC. But like if you said, I want to reduce hours for the administrative staff 50%, and then you create a separate unit for the line staff, and I only want to reduce them 30% because they're generating more revenue for your company, that's perfectly fine. And you can have as many units as you can make some justification. I mean, you can have the painters different from the assemblers and the administrative staff or the HR staff. You can use multiple units as long as you meet that 3 worker requirement for each unit.
And I would just say, I don't usually bring this up, but if you're in a union covered industry, you do have to clear it with your union before we can approve the plan. So the majority of the questions that we have been starting to get on the short-time compensation program are very technical. And so the first thing I'm going to do is give you the contact for the technical short-time compensation questions. And that's 402-471-9912. 402-471-9912. And when I say technical, if you're having trouble getting your plan filed, if you're having trouble with the weekly certification process, or what to do if your plan needs changed, that is the number you need to call. Make sure you tell them that it's a technical question so we get you routed to the right place. We're building an additional team of technical experts when it comes to some of this. But most commonly, how does the weekly certification process work? So in general, the employer files for the plan. Once the plan is approved, we need every one of your employees covered by that plan to do an initial claim. Without the initial claim, we can't determine their weekly benefit amount and do not know what they are potentially eligible for. Once they've filed their initial claim, they are pretty much a passive participant in the STC program unless you reduce them outside of that 10 to 60% program. The employer files the weekly certification. So every week by Wednesday, hopefully, the employer should file their weekly certification. we're working on changes to that as well, where it will present exactly what you said in your plan. And so then you only have to change if you varied from your plan.
And that's done through the upload of a spreadsheet, right?
No.
It's individual still?
It's
Okay.
individual. And even in the change that we're doing, what it does is it presents everyone on an individual level. As long as you followed your plan perfectly, you don't make any changes. If you have to change a percentage here or there, you are able to do it at that time. The one other key thing is if your employees have work from any other employment, which is a little more rare at the moment, but if they have any work from any other employment, they do need to let you know that, and you will have to report that. Then the next question, our forms for STC are not updated to reflect some of the executive order changes. So one of our forms says you are getting charged. We will fix that on the back end. I apologize for that. Form changes in my mind should be simple. They just don't seem to be. Then because the individual has to still file their individual initial application for benefits, the separation information form is going out to the employers. I'm hoping that's a glitch that we can get fixed, but in the meantime, to respond to that, you just write still employed STC, and that is all the information we need to handle that. I think that that's kind of the majority of the frequently asked questions. Oh, that's not true. How do you change a plan after the fact? I apologize. To change a plan after the fact, you can log into your account on Anyworks, and then there is a modify plan link. If you have any troubles with that, I would refer you again to the technical question number of 402-471-9912.
Is there an employer handbook published in that regard?
There is, unfortunately, the handbook isn't extremely reflective of the changes to the new system, but there is a guide that is available at dol.nebraska.gov/STC, and I can send that link out to you after this to distribute. And there are instructions for the employers on weekly cert, and there are instructions for employers on how to do the initial application. There's also a PowerPoint video presentation on the initial application, although it's a little lengthy and we're working on reducing the time. I think it's over 30 minutes long. So I'm working on reducing that.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Now, I think this is a good time we take a break so we can get some questions.
Okay.
And then after we get a few questions, then we'll finish the rest of the program dealing with some other interplay and time issues and so forth.
I'll start with the questions we have about STC, since we just kind of finished on that one. Can you quick remind us where would a company go to set up that STC plan?
So you log into your Anyworks account, and then you go to Employer Services, and then from Employer Services there should be a Unemployment Services link that you can find, and from there should be an option for STC or short-time compensation.
If an employee is not, if the employer does not have an STC plan, how would it affect an employee's unemployment if they were working 40 hours a week and are now only working a 20-hour week, but the employer has not done an STC plan?
Okay, that's a good question to ask, because we had a lot of questions about that with employers who reduced hours and don't have an STC plan in place. Basically, in Nebraska, you are considered unemployed by statute if you worked less than 40 hours and earned less than your weekly benefit amount. And so if you were earning $880 a week and your benefit amount was $440 and you earned $400 from that employer that week, you would be eligible for a regular unemployment benefit. And one of the things that's really important with the FPUC in place right now is if you are eligible for a single dollar of regular unemployment, you get the full $600 of FPUC. So it's a formula, a little bit of math. Fortunately, I didn't have any of those classes in law school, but it's simple enough, even I can do it. So as long as they're working less than 40 hours in the week and they're earning less than their weekly benefit amount, they are eligible for a regular benefit of some amount or another and the $600 besides.
Outside of STC, is it possible for employees to be eligible for benefits due to reduced wages? Like you said, but not total loss. I think that's the exact same question we just sort of answered. So would this work the same in a situation in which an employee gets a reduction in hours or reduction in salary as well? So if it's not just reduced hours, but also reduction in salary outside of an STC program, would they still be eligible too?
Reduction in salary is a little more complicated because, as I said, our statutory definition is tied to hours worked. So, you know, if you're working 30 hours a week and they cut your pay, it probably wouldn't, and you didn't earn more than half your weekly benefit amount, you'd be fine. But if you were still working 40 hours a week, I think under the statute, that would take you out of eligibility for unemployment.
Okay, so sort of an interplay between, it's sort of more based on the 40-hour reduction, and then the salary piece could kind of come into play underneath. Okay.
Yes.
Couple more. For STC, does the hours reduced have to be consistent or can they vary them from week to week?
So in general, they're supposed to be consistent, but we are giving quite a bit of flexibility in that regard. You might get an automated letter from us. I'm not sure if I've gotten that turned off, but yes, you can vary week to week.
And this is my last STC one. How is STC eligibility affected by overtime? If employees normally work overtime, must their hours be reduced to 40 and then further reduced to qualify?
Yeah, so we base everything off of a 40-hour week. Well, you can go less than that, but we start at a 40-hour work week.
I have several other just sort of general questions. Just remind us, it's correct. Is it correct that the process for people to receive both the state and the federal benefits is to go through the state unemployment on any works? And then I, as an employer, still just have to do the separation form, and you all will determine eligibility for state and federal?
Yeah, that's one of the few benefits of this current process is it all runs through the unemployment program. So as an employer, you only have one separation information form to respond to. And if you are eligible for regular benefits or PUA, we will automatically add in the rest of the federal benefits. You don't have to do anything.
And I think we've covered this, but does an employee have to be eligible for Nebraska unemployment benefits to be eligible for the extended federal benefits as well? For example, the $600 a week?
It depends which program, but yes, to get the $600, you have to have $1 of eligibility, but it does not have to be Nebraska unemployment. It can be any of the federal programs as well, but there does need to be $1 of eligibility.
Can employees apply directly to the federal government for the extra $600?
No.
How does it affect an employee's unemployment if they work 1 week, then off the next in a rotating fashion?
That wouldn't be terribly complicated. It's easy for me to say as an administrator. They would be eligible during the week that they don't work, and the only issue would be whether they would come back in and have to reopen their claim, but I don't think they would even have to do that at this point in time. So it's fine. They'll be eligible 1 week and not eligible the other.
Can you remind us again how it affects a person's unemployment if they seek additional part-time work at a much reduced rate to have some extra money coming in during this time?
What we do with every regular unemployment claim is we disregard the first 25% of the wages that you received that week, regardless of where it was from, whether it's from your regular employer or whether it was from the part-time job you picked up at the Quick Stop. And then we do a dollar for dollar offset against your benefits after that. So it will, if you're earning 25% or less of your weekly benefit amount, it's never going to make a difference because we'll disregard that.
Is the 50% of benefits restriction applicable to the federal extended benefits, or is that on top of the 50% of net wages available at the state? For example, in some instances, an employee could make more on unemployment due to these federal extended benefits.
Yeah, you can make more. I mean, it's an oddity of the system. There are people who will make more with the unemployment system, with the FPUC payment put on top of it than they made before, because as the questioner noted, your benefits are based upon half your weekly benefit amount. Well, if you're less than $880 a week, you're always going to be earning quite a bit more with the FPUC. But of course, there's always the caveat that expires in July.
And just to clarify, the calculations for the federal programs are the same as far as determining the weekly benefit amount. The only difference is the minimum amount you're entitled to under the pandemic unemployment assistance is higher than our state minimum.
How do unemployment benefits flow to a 17-year-old? Would they also be eligible for the $600 extended benefit?
Our unemployment benefit system is built based upon wages you've earned. There are no minimum age requirements. You still have to worry about your federal wage an hour and your state child labor laws, but it's not tied to age. It's not tied to occupation. So if you are a 17-year-old that's been working 30 hours a week and you get laid off as a result of the pandemic, you will be eligible for unemployment benefits.
Got a different type of commission question. What would you sort of recommend, or how to report commissions more on a weekly basis if they're earned more in sort of lump sum? Should folks, if they're only earning $0 in the first 3 weeks of a month, and then in the last week is when a lump sum sort of commission comes through at a large amount, sort of how should they report those wages on a weekly basis when they're sort of paid sort of lump sum commission?
If the commissions are determinable during that week, you should make an estimate on your weekly benefit, your weekly certification, and say, I think I earned X number of dollars in commissions that week. There are some commissions that you have to do so many weeks in a row before you're entitled that commission. So it's when that commission becomes due and payable to you. And in the normal scenario is you've earned so much in commissions a week, you know pretty much what you earned. But if there's one kind of lump sum that you earn for 4 consecutive weeks at a certain level of sales or something like that, then that would be reported, that lump sum would be reported in that week.
What's the actual language if someone is denied unemployment assistance from the Nebraska level and then they will be kicked over to the federal PUA? I've received a message from someone that made a claim for unemployment that I did apply but do not qualify for it. I was approved for $0. I know that applicants will first be denied by the state in order to be processed into the PUA. Is the language approved for $0 the same as being denied?
Yes. I mean, you can be denied or you can be monetarily ineligible. There's one and the same effect in our system. So unfortunately, Congress passed this and the law went into effect within a week. And so amazingly, our software coders hadn't imagined it in their dreams. And so we're having to get the coding done. Hopefully by next week, instead of just getting that 0, it'll take you on and start asking you about questions about self-employment income. But for right now, that 0 is the trigger to get you into the system. And for those who filed already, we will go ahead and follow up with them and complete their PUA claim once we have the software completed.
In order to get the full amount of unemployment, does a person have to be officially laid off?
No, it's tied to hours worked and wages earned. So if your employer just says, don't come in next week, call me on Friday to see if we've got work the next week, that's good enough for what we need to do because you were unemployed that week.
And the executive order also touches on the leave of absence provisions.
But all this still, the foundation for this is COVID related.
Yes.
Well, yes and no. The PUA is definitely entirely COVID. We do have some regular unemployment claims that are still following through. The person's been late 50 days in a row and you finally fire them. That still goes under the regular system. The person just says, does the Johnny paycheck and says, take this job and walks out the door. That still counts as a regular quit. And those sorts of quits and fires do not fall under the under the COVID field.
When should our employees expect to start receiving benefits once they have filed in the system?
Well, it's a good question. We were doing so amazingly well before we got hit by this avalanche. When we ran our March numbers, 97% of our people were paid in the first 14 days. I would imagine right now that if we can hit 75% paid within their first 28 days, that we'll be doing really well. We're processing them as you always would on a first come, first serve. We added on 150 staff this week to ours and outside staff that we're using to try and get through this avalanche of claims. In terms of our internal staff, they're probably doing better than they've done ever in terms of turning stuff out. It's just that we basically have had we've had twice as many claims since the first part of March as we had in all of fiscal year 19.
Just to follow up, if an employee decides to place themselves on COVID-19 leave of absence because they are simply uncomfortable going anywhere, or they have a personal medical condition that they feel puts them at high risk, but work is available for this employee, they are not eligible for unemployment, correct?
They have to have some sort of doctor's advice before we will put them into the COVID-19. They can't just, I'm scared. And I recognize that. I think everybody's worried right now. But yeah, if you're not acting on medical advice, then it's more likely to be considered a quit than it is to be categorized as COVID-19.
If a person is part-time at 2 employers and they go back to work at one of those employers who is participating in the PPP loan program, can they still get unemployment benefits at the second employer such that they could get the extra $600 unemployment?
We consider all wages from all employers in gross. We don't break out on a per employer basis. So assuming that you stay under that, don't earn more than your weekly benefit amount, don't work 40 hours, you will be eligible for a partial unemployment benefit check. And if you're eligible for $1 of regular unemployment, you get the $600 on top.
And is it $600? Is the $600 all or nothing? Is there any scenario where someone gets less than that $600?
Yes. No, there are scenarios because it can be reduced.
Well,
Offsets.
but it's reduced through the offset.
Yes.
You are getting the 600 on your 1099-G that you get next January. It will tell you the 600. You may not receive the full 600 because you elected to have state or federal income tax withheld. You could have a child support obligation. You could have a food stamp overpayment, something like that, that's offset against the amount. But the $600 in and of itself is an all or nothing. The only question is whether you've agreed to or are forced to have some offsets.
Just the thought, does this include wage garnishments?
No, unemployment benefits are not subject to wage garnishments.
Thank you.
So can you just go back to, these benefits are taxable or not?
Yes. And we will send you a 1099-G on or before January 31st, 2021.
So last question that I have, and then we can return to the program. Regarding STC, if an employer is reducing earnings and hours worked by 10% and the employer files for STC, what percentage of unemployment benefits are the employees eligible for? 90% of unemployment or 10% of unemployment?
So I say you get 10% of your weekly benefit amount. So it's a 90% reduction from your weekly benefit amount, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if you were entitled to $440 a week, the maximum amount, and there was a 10% reduction in your hours, you would get $44 and the famous $600 FPUC payment on top of it, which is another incentive. If the employer is looking for ways to really help their workers, I mean, if they can get them into even down to that 10% reduction, they automatically get the $600 besides. So it can be a win-win if the employer needs to cut back on personnel expenses and wants to give its workers, in effect, almost a bonus. They can.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions right now. Now we're going to turn to a little bit of an interplay of state, of federal programs as well. And that was kind of a good comment you made, because you have that situation, you have the payroll protection, the PPP loan program. Talk a little bit about the interplay between these programs and how they are coordinated or not coordinated.
Well, there's not just a lot of direct coordination between the two, but if you look at the Families First Corona Response Act, there was some paid leave provisions under that, both as to enhanced family leave is I think what they call it, or paid sick leave. Any wages that you receive under either of those two programs is a wage that needs to be reported and offsets benefits, standard 25% disregard, dollar for dollar after that. So that has a direct interplay in that particular case. And then if your employer calls you back because they're using the PPP plan and you decide you'd rather stay home, that's a quit. And so there is an interplay there. And of course, if your employer, if it's one of several employers, or you're somebody working a second job and a part-time job, and one of them pulls you back, then just go ahead and report the wages that you've earned that week, have been paid that week, and we'll figure it out on the back end as to whether or not you're eligible. We don't expect people to do that calculation for us.
Specifically, if an employer does qualify for a PPP loan or grant, and can they still be eligible for short-time compensation?
I'm going to leave that to the short-time compensation expert, because I don't know the answer on that one, quite honestly.
Well, we won't consider that, actually. And so it's not a question we ask. It's not something you would need to tell us, and it would not impact your short-term compensation eligibility. Where it impacts is whether or not you still meet all the requirements for the PPP program, because as I understand it, they do have guarantees that you have to meet for maintaining your workforce to a certain degree. I don't think it's full, though, if I understood it correctly. So I think that's something that you have to refer to the SBA on. But PPP, from our perspective, has no impact on how we treat you. But I do think unemployment might have an impact on your PPP loan.
Okay. Now, I know you talked about some timelines before, and kind of like to revisit that, particularly for those timelines as things begin to shift across the country. There's kind of a reopening, so to speak, and there's a plan for that. So that and other future issues to consider, kind of words of warning, perhaps.
Okay. Well, I mean, one, executive orders can be changed by the stroke of the governor's pen. So they're not a forever document. They don't require the legislature to do anything. So we'll be reviewing these plans as we go forward. And I think part of the extension of EO 20-4 by 2014 was okay, we were thinking this would all be over by the end of April, and now it looks like it's going to have a more lingering effect. But we're going to be doing a constant review in this matter, especially on the work search issue. I think, as we go forward, I mean, if the economy really is starting to reopen, then those people who don't have a job to go back to, then they need to start searching for work again. So we'll review that at some point in time to consider whether it would be extended. I would hope the economy is back in the shape that by the end of July, we're definitely not going to be extending a second time, or at least it's not in my original considerations to recommend to the governor that we do that. We were in remarkably good position in terms of the trust fund starting out. I mean, we had over twice as much in our trust fund as we paid out in the worst year of the Great Recession. USDOL considered us to be the 6th most solvent state, so we're in a better position than most states to take a hit. But as you all know, our system is based upon the amount of benefits that we've paid, and we're going to pay a lot more benefits this year than we did last year. So that will be taken into consideration when the rates are set next fall. Fortunately, because we had a larger fund, we can take, a little bit bigger hit than some states without causing such a drastic effect in the next year's taxes. But we'll have to look at that as we go forward. My personal prediction is if we're really beginning to reopen on May 1st, we should be in pretty good shape. I mean, we're going to, it'll shock some people when they see it. Before this is over, we'll probably be paying out 18 to 20 million in a week in unemployment benefits, which is a lot of money, even when you started from 449 million. But so, you can't sustain that for forever. But, assuming that we return to some sense of normalcy around the first part of May, we should be okay.
Well, that's kind of ending on a little bit of a higher note in that regard. So I'm glad we have the capability and capacity to continue on in that regard. John and Katie, thank you so much. We're we're trying to compress this into an hour to an hour and 15. We're going to make the hour 15 mark probably.
Okay. Don't talk too long.
We have no other questions at this time that I know of. So we'd like to thank the panel. Again, we really do appreciate the time that you spent with us. If anyone has follow-up questions, please email them to khasselbrook@anychamber.com. And with that, we'll sign off and look forward to seeing you all in better times. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.